call us to order and we'll see where we go. So this is the March 9th Fiber Broadband Completion Task Force meeting being held on Zoom. It is 6:42 according to my computer. And I'm Mark Howell, the chair, and I'm going to do a roll call. Gordon Brockway.
Present.
And Gail Heyer.
Here.
And I'll note that Scott Hopkinson and David Hesel are not present. So we'll call the meeting to order anyway, and just dive into a couple of housekeeping things. We could have a volunteer clerk. I know everybody's been doing a lot, and Gordon, you did last week.
I can do tonight.
Okay, thank you, Gail.
Thanks.
All right, and we do have some sets of minutes. I had a chance to briefly read through them, but not really comment, because they were distributed yesterday. And we have minutes from February 10th as well as March 2nd. Gail, I don't know if you had a chance to read them, but I'm perfectly okay with if we want to wait on actually approving them. I see Gordon distributed a second set of the.
It was actually thanks to Gail, and I read it and sent it along. I didn't make any changes. So if we could use Gail's as the
sure,
as the markup version, that would save me a merge step.
Okay. And
Yeah, that's the only one I had time to look at. February 2nd. I mean February 10.
right.
And thank you very much, Gail.
No problem.
Right.
For your comments.
I will say that I noticed a couple of, we could pull them up. I noticed a couple of things on there that I really wanted to go back and try to clarify myself, but didn't get a chance to. And it mostly has to do with some of the statements I made around the payment in lieu of franchise. And the other question that was there, which was about the total of aggregate of transfer of revenue. And I'm not sure exactly what I was saying in there. So that prompted me to go back and look. And by the way, I did follow up with the town manager's office earlier this week about the fact that, once again, there seems to be kind of a lag between the recordings of these meetings and the recordings coming live on YouTube. So Chris Carmody said he was going to go back and try to check to make sure that they're getting posted, because I have been using those to some extent to kind of recontextualize some of what's going on in the minutes. So I, for one, would prefer to hold these as a draft and maybe deal with them the next time we meet, if you guys are okay with that.
It's fine with me.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. All right. So given that, excuse me. So on the chair's report side of things, I also think it's a good idea, just in general, for us to, since we don't have David or Scott and I don't have any sense of whether or not they've actually seen them or looked at the minutes to not just go ahead and review them without their participation. Future meetings. So as we've been talking about, the enterprise budget hearing is next Thursday, and I'm expecting that we will want to participate in that meeting. So we've been planning on not meeting on that day, which would mean that we can resume our Thursday schedule on the 24th and 31st, which will be hopefully the last two meetings, trying to deal with where we are on the first draft. This morning, and Gordon, this is probably as good a place as any to pick up with the conversation. The light board did meet, and there was a pretty substantial update on broadband given by Jason Bulger, and I'll just summarize the notes that I took on that, because I think they're almost all relevant. The first one was it was confirmation of something that I think we discussed a bit last week, which is that Jason is functioning as the interim manager since mid-February for the broadband business, and that seems to be a return to how that was organized previously, although they do expect to recruit for a telecom director who would report to him. So that's, and he stressed that he's been, involved and attending and coordinating with broadband all along for the last couple of years. So he seems pretty well up to speed. He's been working on their hardware servers, their fiber inspection and cleaning tools, procurement, and the needs assessment. There's some hardware installation pending. They're looking at CRM tools to handle communications. And in that context, he seemed to be suggesting that there was going to be much more of an initiative around trying to communicate status of orders and a better set of customer outreach for new order handling to try and make sure people understood where they were in the queue. They're also looking into help desk RFP, vendor contracts to help with their repair backlog, a focus on reliability communication and post outage analysis, which they started to build after last year's difficulty, as well as had exercised. He mentioned at the rodent damage that had occurred. Also, to really, I think, re-stressing the idea of communicating proactively around any activity that they might be planning to do that could potentially create an outage, as opposed to what he referred to as sort of a past high bar, which was, communicate if there was an outage and something known rather than doing that, which I generally support that. They are up to full staff with the exception of the telecom director, with a fourth tech and a second engineer. They're looking to coordinate with the town's risk committee around what are the risks to the service and I think importantly too, in the update, he recognized that there really is a need for the community to weigh in on what the mandate for broadband is. And I was pleased to hear that, because I think that is very much what we've been focused on, which is raising the right strategic and goal-oriented issues to have an appropriate citizen-driven discussion about what we're trying to accomplish with the broadband system, and then expect the staff to do that. There are some efforts going on. He did raise some questions about, or did respond to, the reminder that I had sent him about, we'd like to know about installations and subscribers, and he suggested that there's some inconsistencies in the data, and that they're trying to audit that data. And so while he was not delivering something today, he was expecting to deliver something at a future meeting. I believe there is expected to be an extra light board meeting on March 30th. So that's 3 weeks from today, which would be an extra meeting for them to, and the bulk of their meeting was around strategic issues for the light plant. So again, I mentioned expand marketing outreach, think about in particular, the use of, or the speeds that are offered, in other words, service levels, and what impact that might have on how attractive the service is. And so, and he invited anybody that had suggestions to be in contact with him. Gordon, is there anything you want to add from
I just, and to bring it into the written record, I just emailed to the task force my notes, which
Okay.
are pretty much the same as what you wrote. At the highest level, I thought that the most important point that he made was the idea of Concord. Concord needs to decide whether or not broadband is a utility or an enterprise. Enterprise being something that is profit oriented and can pick up the opportunities as they arise, and utility being a must serve kind of commitment. Even between those two poles, there's a gradation. I think that what we've been talking about is a must serve anybody who asks for it, which I guess is kind of close to the must serve idea. And how do you as a community, how do you embrace the more ambitious of those two goals? We're already pretty effective in the enterprise side.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what we're kind of all about. But the thing that kind of made me think about was, okay, yeah, so I think there's recognition that there are these two poles, these two extremes, so to speak, that we're trying to explore and understand and advocate for. I think that some members of this task force actually pretty much have their hearts set on the more ambitious goal, but we don't have it's not going to happen just by our wishing for it. And so I guess the thing that just occurs to me is, how do we write that report? Do we write it by embracing one of those goals, or by describing the two paths and analyzing the two paths? And maybe out of that analysis, ideally we'd be able to say, we want the more ambitious implementation, and this is what it's going to cost to get it, and these are the ways to do it, and the town can decide whether or not it wants to pay that cost. I'm not sure we're that far down the line that we actually know the answers to those questions. So then it becomes more of an exploration or something that the town would agree is worth continuing to pursue. So that was the highest thing. Really love the way that he was talking about organizing the work and just doing better. It takes practice, takes training, and takes that was the other point. The backlog is how do you measure it? And we've been asking staff to tell us what it is. There have been a couple of figures like that. The backlog, there's the number of installations, which is related to the backlog. I guess it deletes from the backlog. How quickly can you do, what is the rate? How often can you do an install? Or how many installs have there been? These are all related metrics. And my perception is that they've been generated for us on the fly each time we've asked for them. And so it becomes an exercise. Okay, how am I going to do this task? And this is back to what I was talking about a second ago. It's like, in order to get to a higher level of operational capability, it needs to be very easy and very repeatable. And every time you do it, you get the same answer. And I think that's what Jason was talking about. So it's sort of institutionalizing and providing some resources to actually make those numbers easier to generate and more accurate.
Mm-hmm. I think operationally they are a little bit in the transition amongst tools. The basic order management tools were pretty rudimentary. I know that the installation team tended to work off a Google sheet that had the status of all the projects they were doing, and certainly the technicians had, according to stages of the installation process, knew how many they were working at any given time. I think that it is true that the COVID sort of stoppage and policy changes that introduced a whole new element which the system wasn't particularly well suited to do. And I also realized that NISC, which is the consolidated management system software that the entire CMLP uses had some tooling that kind of needed to be implemented along order management, service order management. So I don't know how much progress they've made on that, but I certainly understand the fact that there were different versions of working files. But I will say that my advice, and I did provide a little bit of advice on this subject offline, was pick something and stick with it. And for my money, I thought that the number to use for how many subscribers are there is how many people are you really sending bills to that you're expecting them to pay. I mean, that seemed like it's an auditable control point that's repetitive and outside the system. And I would suggest to continue to use that. And one of the things that I did bring for today's meeting is a little bit of a further look at that as part of the analysis that I talked about doing last week. So we'll probably get into that in a couple of minutes. But I agree with you. From my perspective, the update that was provided was much more in keeping with I think the attention that it needs, and so I was certainly glad to see that effort being made in the detail. So I think that's encouraging, and I think that it's quite clear that we've got a basic agreement on sort of what lane we're in relative to what lane he's in, and the interest in coordinating between the two.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think I had anything else on the chair's report. We talked a little bit about the possibility of whether or not, and I think we might come back to this, is whether we want to do something in person towards the, either at the end of March or following meeting. So far, I have gotten us Zoom credentials for the remainder of March, but at the next meeting, I do want to start to have additional conversation about whether we should actually do an in-person session. Any reaction to that from either?
I would suggest that even if we do it in person, that we also have a Zoom.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah, I like the hybrid option for sure. I think that makes it a lot easier for a lot of people to attend.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I certainly agree with that. And I think at least as long as, well, the authorization to meet over Zoom is extended until July 15th by the governors in the state. I think I mentioned that a couple of meetings back, but because we've not all been here all at the same time, I'm not sure whether everybody heard it. So we're kind of covered for the term that we're working under, but to do as makes sense, and this is pretty useful. Okay.
I don't know if now is the time to discuss this, especially given Jason Bulger's interest in getting public input. Do we want to talk about having a public hearing, and maybe that would be after we have a draft of the report, or well, it's kind of hard to imagine getting a public hearing done in the month of March, since here we are. But I don't know. I think that might be helpful.
Okay. Yes, and so that reminds me of one of the things that I forgot to make a good note on. But I did meet with Wendy Ravelli in the last week. She's the current chair of the Light Board, as I think everyone knows. And we just tentatively discussed bringing up for discussion our first draft at the Light Board's April 13th meeting. That's their next regularly scheduled meeting. So if we stay on the schedule that we're on, where we're trying to have a draft done by the end of the month, first week of April. That should give us an opportunity to do that. That might take the form of some kind of summary presentation of the recommendations with, that just sort of think of it more as an introduction to what we think we're saying so that we can get some feedback. So that would be at least one opportunity for some public comment. But of course, I think that there's something to be said for maybe doing that and then also being able to say, and oh, by the way, if you come see us tomorrow night, we're happy to gather all input and feedback on that. So that's my thinking, something around mid-April.
So we would say, come see us tomorrow night, meeting at our regularly scheduled
or
meeting. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, would it make sense to try to the extent that anyone actually reads the Concord Journal anymore, would it make sense to get an announcement in the Journal about, hey, if people have, thoughts, comments they want to share, please, we're writing a report. We'd love to get more public input.
Yeah, I think there's certainly should be some broader communication effort. That might be one of them. I think that's worth it. We could certainly ask for news and notices to go out too, which I think tends to get the people who tend to come to meetings.
And it is news and notices is the Concord townhouse project. Anyway,
Yeah.
what I was going to suggest was, details aside, there's staff that handles publicity and
Right.
public communication. So we can feed it to them and they could get it out onto social media and maybe a blurb in the Concord Journal and so forth. And in fact, they actually kind of not only are happy to do that, kind of prefer to be the interface to.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know who that person is?
Yeah, Aaron Stevens.
Oh, okay. I think I know Aaron.
Yeah.
Okay. So do we want to put that April 14th date out there? I mean, obviously anyone's welcome to any of these meetings, but if we kind of have an agenda, I don't know, like a placeholder for that. Yeah,
I think that's
topic.
If I'm just quickly glancing at the April calendar, that is, I believe is that the week before school vacation?
Yes, and I just actually booked my trip to Florida, so I am around on the 14th, but not the week after.
Great, and so that's what I was kind of getting at, is that probably the choices in that time frame are the 14th or the 28th, because I think that it would probably do us a disservice to try to book anything during that school vacation week.
Yeah.
Most people, or many people, are likely to be away. So let's start working towards that. And I do like the idea of maybe doing something in the hearing room or in the CMLP meeting room, one or the other, so that it's someplace where people can come and talk to us, and hopefully can also be virtual if there are people who are more comfortable doing that, since we don't know quite where we'll be in a month and a half. Okay.
So who is the person who schedules the rooms? Is that someone else?
That she's not the right person to schedule the room, but I can talk to Chris Carmody about that. And I think if we decided that we wanted to go to the CMLP room, that would be Karen Farrell, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. But so let's put that out there. We'll talk with the rest of our task force about that general idea, but I like that as a schedule. Okay, good. Anything else on that? So working towards a first draft, talk to the light board about that on 4/13. Potentially schedule public hearing or a follow-up meeting for around our feedback from that on the 14th, probably and or the 28th. The 28th is late because that's close to when we want to be done by. Okay, good. I don't have anything on the roads program item per se. I'm gonna have to chase some people to get some attention on that. I do have something on number 5 on our agenda, the lost revenue estimate. So last week, Scott had shared with me the spreadsheet that he was working with. I found that a little bit unclear to me. So I wanted to volunteer an alternative. The alternative is, interestingly, the numbers, if I'm reading what Scott was had put together, the numbers I don't think come out that different at the end, but I thought it might be useful to just walk through this. And this, I believe everybody will recall, is the idea that we might want to try to document at least in a model that tries to suggest how much revenue may have been lost as a result of the decisions that were made to suspend routine installation activity during the pandemic and subsequently. So I'll just share my screen briefly and show you how I got there, and as an element of discussion. So and then I had one other thing to kind of add to that. So this is a spreadsheet that's based around that is originally came from Matt Cummings, and he had and what I'll do, I'll just highlight the bottom line number. But what he had done was he had provided us with the residential, so column C, D, and F here are the residential, commercial, and total subscribers from the billing system. I had calculated a month-to-month change number for each month, and the months there are, the most recent data we have was November of 2021, and it's all the monthly data going back more or less to the beginning of 2017, although there is a small gap in 2017. And so what I calculated here was from December to January of 2017, subscribers grew by 30%. In 2018, subscribers grew by 22%. In 2019, they grew by 14% through the whole year. And in 2020, it was 5%. And as of the most recent data we had from November, it was another 5%. So presumably 2021 might be slightly greater than that. And all that really was the math was simply taking a look at the December of the previous December and coming up with what the difference was in subscribers. So I had made the comment a couple of meetings ago that, in my view, and I think someone took issue with it, that installations had essentially come to a halt. And what I was pointing at was, May of 2020, there was 1 net change, 5 in July, 9. If we look back at previous years, May was 47 installations in 2019. It tended to be one of the bigger months in earlier years. So I think you can really make the case there was 39 in 2019 that, there was an action that resulted in that. So what I also did was I computed the average installations per month for each year. and that number has been declining. And we, in some of our discussion, I think, we raised the question, I believe it was last week, how do we know that we're not sort of maxing out? That the take, we might not have achieved our, final and highest take rate. And we don't know that, but we, time will tell. But that's one of the concerns in here. But anyway, there's some information about that. What I computed after that was, I assumed that, December 2019 was kind of, the last month of sort of that we could, firmly call pre-pandemic. You could argue maybe it was January, but so the math that I did was I took this 14% annualized change rate and applied it to 2020 and said, if we had continued to install at just the same rate as the prior year, how many subscribers would there have been? And that turns out to be 1,615, which is a net difference compared to the actual reported number of 131. And then I did the same thing. I applied that going forward again, working off of that 1615 base, and said if that had continued through, and again, this time I said November, but the year-end number for 2021 could have been assumed to be 1847, and that would be a difference of 295 total subscriptions. So is that logic making sense to you guys?
So the 295, is that 295 more than the 130 for the year?
Yeah, 295 is the difference between the actual reported rate in November, which was 1552, and what a sort of a 14% increase over 2 years would have led to, working off of the 20.
Very accurate, Gail higher.
Yeah.
So I would expect the deficit to double if it's linear. I mean, I have to graph it to explain why, but that would then be a 262. It was worse than that.
Yeah, it's worse than that because I compounded it. So I did this 1847 is computed as a 14% growth off of the 16.
Okay, yeah. So it's not a line. It's actually a
it's
an exponential. But the other thing is that I'm seeing negative numbers in the MTM change.
Yes,
they're much bigger in 2021 than in the previous year. So I don't think we can take credit for the negative for the. I mean, if people departed, did people depart because of COVID? That's my question.
Well, I think that if we think back to what was going on in June of 2021, that was the month after that very disruptive few weeks.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm actually, let me take back what I just said. Let's keep your analysis. I think that we're entitled to those too. And the reason is that COVID affected our operation, our capabilities. It just made everybody operate at a little bit lower level.
Yeah, and regard, yeah, I would say so. And I think there's anyway, I wanted to keep it relatively simple.
Yeah,
so
no, I like this. Just leave it like that.
Yeah. So then this small block here is estimating the loss. So so in 2020, we had 131 fewer subscriptions at year end than we could have reasonably expected to have at the end of 2020. And that number is and the average revenue per year from a customer, and I just happen to know this off of my head, but it's possible to figure it out, has been around $70. It's actually been a little bit more. If you think we have 4 service tiers, that are priced at $50, $65, $75, and $90 essentially. The average subscriber is paying about $70. It's kind of between the two middle amounts. So some people are less, some people are more, but the cumulative loss that the loss that we're looking at is essentially 131 subscribers over a year, so multiplied by the average revenue per, and then divide that by 2. And the reason that you tend to do that is because on average, each of those people was there 6 months for that year in the first year of service. So that would lead to a potential revenue loss of $55,000 for 2020.
Yeah. The other thing you could do is do it monthly, and then you wouldn't need to divide by 2.
Yeah,
Calculate the deficit monthly.
And realistically, that there's a skew because generally speaking, January, February, March, you don't get very many new subscribers actually because it's the winter, and it tends to be a little bit backloaded. But this is just sort of to get an order of magnitude. And then what happens here is for the second year, we're subtracting the difference. So because the 295 difference includes the 131 already. So I'm looking at how many new subscribers were expected in 2021, which was 163. So that's over and above the year end. Again, in that year, those 163 contributed another 68,000. But the assumption in this model is that the impact of not having that original 131 is now a full year impact. So it's the red box times 2, plus the blue box, which is 68. So that leads to $178,000 of sort of revenue lost. And so adding those 2 years back to back would suggest that, going into 2021, we would have seen $234,000 in broadband revenue had installations continued at the same rate that they were proceeding in 2019. Now, I recognize there's a lot of assumptions baked into that, but I thought it would be, it's a fairly straightforward way to adjust it, and there's certainly ways to tweak it up or down. But
no, I thought we kind of talked about the idea that actually the deficit extends into the future too.
Mm-hmm.
You have to discount it.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I need to take a break for family reasons. Okay. So I'll be hopefully back in a few.
Okay. Thanks. All right, we'll try not to make any decisions while you're on.
Okay.
Okay.
Because we can't close the meeting without a quorum.
Yeah. So we may have to sort of be on suspension for a minute.
Okay.
I'm going to stop sharing for a second and just check who's here. I heard somebody. So Andy joined. So we don't have a quorum at the moment. So
yeah. But we could get I'm sure we could get a hold of Gail.
Yeah.
Just for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thinking about how to project into the future hasn't even happened yet. So it's a projection, right? So that's where a financial model like we've discussed before about a discount rate or a sort of a model that where you say, okay, this is how we imagine it happened. That it says, okay, we're limited if you assume that we actually can't clear the backlog and that we're just the rate of subscription is constant. And we did increase it by hiring another person, another 2 people. And then it goes into the future until we hit that magic number, which is the maximum number of subscribers. And then the difference disappears.
Unfortunately, it's really difficult, I think, especially where at the stage that we are now and, being 3 or 4 months further down the road, it's too early to say whether installations have resumed at a normal pace to really, I think, kind of hone in on how much impact, did people just end up waiting longer and they subscribed anyway, or are they completely gone? But I thought that this was a relatively
Yeah, so what I would recommend, I think that's great. And you could just add some hand waving, the 294 or whatever it is, 200,000, and then something into the future while we continue to recover from this. And I think that's a stance that is defendable, even if it's not specific.
Right. And it's a way of estimating. I mean, you can't know how much parking meter revenue you actually lost, because you never know how many people were going to park there, but or actually did park there. And this is sort of in that class of things. But I think it is quite clear, especially when you look at the monthly data and you see that we went from, I'm sorry, I'm looking at it just so you can see it. But when you look at these monthly numbers in this column F here, you could see at least double digits was common almost every single month until we hit December of I guess February of 2019, and then we've literally had only a handful of months that even got into double digits.
Yeah, and in light board meetings, they were always throwing around the figure of, we think we can do 30 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at this chart, I don't really see 30 a month. The closest was, there was a 31. So that was kind of an alt. There's a 39. So that's sort of a best case.
And
but here's the thing.
2017 averaged 21 a month. If you look at the number from January, and 2018 averaged 18 and a half a month. So
I think that this group is really determined to turn that around. They've hired some people. I think that we're going to see 30 attained in 2022 and higher, just because I think they've embraced it as something that they'd really like to accomplish.
The other related concept that I wanted to introduce here, because I think that it's relevant, especially to the discussion we were having last week about sort of what's the value of a subscriber. When you don't get that subscriber, what did it really cost you? And also, to some extent, how much should you invest in getting subscribers? Yeah. And that's a little bit of math that I did over here in this kind of block. And so the idea was to take a look at the revenue per subscriber and use this churn rate per year, which I refer to as how many people unsubscribe in a year as a percentage of the total. And I will tell you that our historical number has been around 1 or 2%. But the value of a subscriber then becomes the inverse of the churn rate. So another way to think about it is if a subscriber on average pays you $840 a year and there's a 5% churn rate, that means they're with you for essentially 20 years. So if 20 times 840 is 16.8. So that subscriber is worth about $16,000 over their lifetime on average, if they're likely to churn out. What you can see very clearly here is that when that churn rate drops to 3%, the subscriber value went up. 2%, it's worth almost triple, and a 1% churn rate, and we have experienced something close to that, makes that subscriber worth $84,000 over the life of that. And I didn't do the present value, but obviously, 1% suggests that they're subscribing for 100 years, which is probably not that likely. A 3% turnover rate is basically a 30-year subscription.
Yeah,
so probably,
I would discount. I think 10% is a is something you'll see in the business world a lot,
Yeah,
but I like 7.2% because it doubles every 10 years or half every
yeah.
10 years.
The experience of how many actual cancellations, and again, when we talked about some of the metrics that I'd suggested a couple of meetings ago, I was focused on how many people actually left. And the actual experience that we had over the 7 years that I was running this was that we had very, very few cancellations. You know, just one or two, and oftentimes that was somebody moving out. So certainly other systems, especially systems in highly competitive environments where, you know, maybe you have multiple broadband suppliers all competing with, you know, teaser rates, you may see 30% or 20%, but I would suggest that it's not true here. And the reason that it's important, I think, to at least contemplate this sort of calculation is because it's suggestive of, you know, what that value of that subscription is, also suggests how much you might be willing to pay in terms of construction or marketing or whatever other expenses you had to get that subscriber in the first place. If that's their actual lifetime, you know, sort of lifetime value to you. Anyway, welcome back, Gail. I hope everything's all right.
To be determined.
All right.
Challenges of parenthood.
So that was those were the two sort of bits of math I had committed last week to try to run a new estimate. Scott's spreadsheet, if I reading it correctly, calculated a possible value of about 291,000, but I'm going to have to get. I looked at it and I couldn't quite exactly get it how he was doing that. So that's why I sort of decided to run my own so we could have dueling models and maybe discuss the benefits of each approach separately. One thing to keep in mind, of course, is that if you do something like, you know, change the value of, you know, even $2 from $70 to $72, you know, changes that number fairly quickly. But I just use 70 because it's a round number and it's in the ballpark of what we've seen before. Any further questions on that? Comments?
I like the idea of something that is reasonably easy to explain,
Mm-hmm.
and that can be used to defend the idea of using some of that ARPA money to help dig us out of the hole. But you know, the pitch for it really depends on more than just this justification. It's also like what would be the good that that the money would be put to.
Yeah.
That's you need both sides of the story in order to prevail. And now I'm getting the sense that it's not really up to, not really sure who it is up to, but like some of these trade-offs and decisions and prioritizations for this found money. I don't know how it's being done, but I think the town manager wants to try. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate about aspects of town government that I'm not really acquainted with. Worth the effort, though. It's worth the effort.
Well, I mean, I'll give my opinion about what I think it might want to be used for. Is, you know, we've seen the capital plan that's been proposed by staff and that will be presented, as I believe, as part of the materials at next week's enterprise budget hearing. And it doesn't really start doing much in the way of fiber construction for a couple of years. And, you know, $230,000 or $240,000 would constitute enough funding to maybe pull forward and get started on fiber construction a whole year earlier by sort of populating that pool of money. And
yeah,
if we made the argument that that was that was lost revenue, my recommendation would be to use it in such a way, or to support other, capital and investment needs that might be identified.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm going with it. I don't know if
Great.
anybody else
Yeah.
wants to express
That's
anything.
how we're going to move this thing forward, is making these cases. Now, I had one question that popped in my mind, because I was doing a little bit of editing on the outline yesterday, and I found it very challenging. But here's the thing: is that just now we've just spent 15, 20 minutes, I don't know, maybe a little bit longer, on this analysis. Is this going to find a home in the report, or is this just something that is going to end up in the minutes? Because I'm trying to think how we can pull together our work into the form of a work product
Yeah.
in just a few weeks.
Mhm.
And how you would present this. I mean, I could see that spreadsheet maybe ending up as a exhibit or a figure in a story that we're trying to tell.
Mhm.
But are we actually ready to defend it? How good does it need to be in order to for us to consider it to be compelling? I'm just really in the form about how do we get to work product with all of this great thinking we've been doing, and what should the work product be? Should it be at the kind of level of detail and complexity that a lot of our conversations have turned? Something similar going on with the street list too. That's very granular and very complicated. But it also is part of the basis for our understanding. I don't know. So what do you think?
I think that we owe it to the organization and to the community to document the rationale for how we got there. I do think that we should be making a recommendation that the light plant submit a request for reimbursement of lost revenue under the ARPA program to be prioritized along with the rest of the submissions that are being considered in the process that the select board is doing, because that, I believe, is a viable. There's logic to that. This organization was at some level harmed and set back in time by not getting new customers at a time when business as usual would suggest they would have gotten new customers. And now being able to replace those resources creates the opportunity to kind of get back on track. I
agree. So how about this? What if we wrote a letter instead?
Yeah, momentum has been lost. Well, I think we should suggest, I personally believe that we could, as a task force, we could do that. But also as a task force, we're going out of business in a couple of months. So I think it behooves us to put that, sort of recommend that the light board or someone who's going to be here past, June 30th, take up that particular recommendation and sponsor it. And we do the heavy lifting and say, here it is, here's the logic. Obviously, we'd be happy to come back and talk about how we got there. But I think that it makes sense to put it in.
Where I'm heading with this, and just this is in the category of work product.
Yeah.
If we've got this report, but it's a big thing that's going to take a while to get out. If there's an important message, a letter to the people that would be influenced by it sooner rather than later could maybe could we get this train of thought in front of the FinCom for the what is it, the enterprise budget. It may be technically the wrong forum, because the enterprise budget hearing isn't going to necessarily talk about ARPA at all, but it isn't really. I mean, they could swat it down because they say it's not the right forum, but where else are you going to talk about it? They have to listen to the idea.
Well, I think, and I'm not sure exactly what the current thinking is on the process, but my understanding is there is a list that at least the town manager and the select board have been working off of sort of requests for ARPA funding. So there's that $5.64 million of ARPA relief that's come to the town, and that there's an active discussion about different ways in which that could be applied. And my suggestion is that we sponsor making sure that this is one of those entries. There was already that meeting, I think it was on January 31st, where I discussed some of the thinking about the possibility of creating a revolving fund or some other capital allocation process that would work, which was sort of proactively saying, hey, there's broadband. Wouldn't we like to have more of it? That'd be good. But I think that this is a different argument. It's saying, hey, COVID impacted broadband. It's behind the 8 ball now. It's been impacted. This is a way to help mitigate some of that impact.
Yeah, and I feel, when I talk about a letter, I think that Terry has been really, Terry has attended a lot of our meetings and passed, I'm sure, a lot of our thoughts along. So it's just I just don't want this good thinking to get lost in the noise.
Well, I don't think it will. I think if we have consensus from the task force that this is one of the points that we want to make, and I take your point. I think it's almost, it almost deserves to be pulled out and said, hey, here's something separate and timely. Article 41 talked about the timely opportunities and specifically mentioned ARPA, if I remember right. We should be very clear that this is what our analysis leads to. A, there'd be a good idea to set up a fund if you're in the mood to, but B, at the very least, help us get back to the level of resource that allows a capital program to be pushed ahead. So if we have agreement on that, then I think that that's one of the things, and we will look for, agreement, or at least present it that way when we meet with the light board. I think that's our first stop, because that's the sort of board that's in charge of the enterprise that we're dealing with, and then take it wherever else we can between beginning of April and the end of June, and trust that it will have a sponsor going forward after that.
Okay.
Does that make sense? You agree, Gail?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Sounds good. And I just, Article 41, I don't think it mentioned ARPA in particular, but it did say government funding.
Grant programs and.
Right.
Well, I think we talked about at that point, maybe COVID relief or whatever was the phrase that was, it's been going on so long, we've forgotten the words. Remember when we called it the coronavirus? Anyway. Okay, so I think that's a good place to jump into what you created this week, Gordon. Do you want me to put it on the screen, or do you want to put it on the screen?
Oh, why don't you put it on the screen?
Okay.
There's really not, I didn't really generate much in the way of word count, but just getting some words on the page is a start.
Yeah.
And I'll let you bring it up.
Yeah, sorry, too many things open. No, that's not it.
If it's easier, I can bring it up.
If you have it right there, I'm just sorry, I had
Yeah, you're in the same document place I was a second ago.
Oh, I did find it though.
Okay, then you take it.
I found it amongst the many open windows.
Yeah, I have a ton of open windows too.
I believe this is it. Yes. So you had worked on section 3.
Yeah,
The updates you made are in purple
okay.
screens. So
Huh.
is that reasonably legible to you, Gail?
Yes, thanks.
Good. Yeah. What do you want to say about it, Gordon?
Okay, so one of the things that I found, there are a few things I found challenging. One was bringing to my fingertips the specific information that we've generated and found and collected.
Okay.
So, you can see in that like first paragraph I wrote where it says currently waiting for XX weeks as of, this is about the backlog. How long is that backlog? I don't really remember it. I think it's like 100 people deep,
Yeah.
probably changes every week.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that's just, in a way, that's just wordsmithing. I think we could probably find something along those lines in the written record.
Yes.
Other challenge I had was, I in putting pen to paper, I'm taking the voice for at least a minute
Yeah.
of the group of us, and what do I feel comfortable saying that is truly representative of the group. And it's just kind of a challenge. Like I maybe dwelled on it a few minutes ago when we were talking about Jason Bulger's presentation and the enterprise versus utility question. What should the tone or what should the position of our paper be? So I just found I found it challenging to, and it made me much less adventuresome in the kind of wording that I chose. It made me feel like as if, because of the accuracy, I needed citations and things like that, but also fairness. It's not really a matter of accuracy, but it's a matter of like, this is representative of what we believe as a group.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that if we can kind of get going, doing some composition, we can, and I guess the review process is the perfect way to kind of boil things down to what we do and do not uniformly agree on.
I agree. I certainly found that when I was trying to write recommendations was that, in some senses I was, on purpose trying to be specific about the recommendation so that it would kind of force us to decide where consensus lies, at least within the task force because I think eventually we do want to be specific. I'm perfectly comfortable, by the way, with the idea of presenting alternatives for further discussion or choice later. I think I'm
okay, sure. And here's another example. I'll just read it here. Concord Broadband prioritizes installations in areas and neighborhoods where it is possible quickly to provide this to quickly provide the service to the most people or businesses. So I'm asserting that as a fact. My basis for the fact is what we've been told in light board meetings.
Yep.
I don't believe that's actually the whole story, because for instance, there was an installation or there was a construction that happened, I think when Stephen Crane was still here in downtown business district, which was news to me. I had never been talked about by anybody. It had never been presented to the light board as something that they were thinking about. It might have been it may have fit into that category from the point of view of being an opportunity that popped up, but it wasn't a need that surfaced itself when we were analyzing the GIS.
Hmm.
So I guess there's no harm in just taking staff at their word and saying that they're prioritizing that way. I think it's probably broadly true. I also kind of suspect that Stephen Crane might have tried to push the businesses a little bit towards the head of the line, just to help make Concord a business-friendly community, which I think that's a good thing. I'm not really trying to second guess him, but I'm also, anyway, so I guess, look, I don't have a lot of data. I don't have a lot of insight. I don't have a lot of, I'm not coming from a place of deep suspicion or anything. I just don't necessarily know that much about how staff has made their decisions about prioritization to the point that I can do any more than try to echo it and give it some credits. So, I mean, our committee's time, a fair amount of time talking about just one sentence. And I don't know how, I've gotten kind of vibes from other people on the committee that like, well, I don't know if I can, it's probably fair to head down that path, but it's like, the question asked me, look, you're on the light board. Why don't you know how all these decisions are made? Can you defend them? And I'm like, well, that sounded like the right prioritization scheme, but my job isn't to do their job for them either. So anyway, that was a big speech about just a couple of words, but I was trying to characterize the status quo and how we could expect the organization to kind of continue if we continue. What was the term we used? The as if nothing changed, the steady state or something.
Yeah, or business as usual.
Business as usual state.
Gail, did you have anything you wanted to say about that?
Well, it's in terms of like the composition and it's definitely, you are just one person, you can't write for all five of us, but all of us are reading the document. So I think, and if people don't agree with something or think that something is inaccurate or is an incorrect characterization, I think that we would speak up. So I guess I would maybe not be so worried so much about, I don't know how to say that. Just like, just write it, get it down there. And then if someone doesn't like it, there's like 4 other people who are going to tell you there's a problem with it. I guess that's one comment. And then I guess, so Mark, I wanted to ask, you said something about you didn't have a problem with providing alternatives. Is that what you said? And is that in terms of like the document itself can offer different possible paths, or I wasn't sure what you meant by that.
Yeah, I did mean that. So
Okay.
and this is probably, well, I mean, taking the high level example that Gordon used earlier, we could take we had this discussion when we were talking about this phrase that I introduced in the recommendations around universal access. What do we mean by that? So there are potential, there is the, idea that there could be a goal that says spend whatever you need to spend to get to everybody. That's one answer to that question. And another one is the more sort of, as Gordon referred to, an enterprise approach that says, if it meets a particular business return, we think that we can get a positive business return, then we do it. Otherwise, we don't do it. And if there are some cases where we know that we're not going to get a return, let's say, wiring up all the affordable housing units and then selling them internet for below cost because people that live in affordable housing need that, that's another alternative. And so we could list out these possible outcomes and say, as a matter of policy, there should be a decision made as to whether or not that's going to be the approach.
Yeah, I think I think that would be really helpful. And I wanted to say, like, here, the section of history and analysis of the current approach, I mean, that's pretty factual. I mean, I guess analysis, you can maybe spin it, but I'm not sure how to say this. I mean, the ConcordMA.gov is full of reports like this that mostly go unread. Like if you go searching for something, you'll find this report that was written like 10 or 15 years ago. I'm like, gosh, this is a really nice report. This is really good information, but is anyone really looking at it? So I think you don't necessarily need to, like, I don't know, stress about every little paragraph. And is it cohesive? Is it really making the best argument for this or that policy outcome? But really just have the data there, and then have, sections where it's very clear, like, gosh, if we took this path, then you should think about this. If you take that path, you want to think about this, so that you can kind of break out the pieces. And, whoever is looking at the report at that time might find something that's very helpful for them, for a specific topic. I don't know, that maybe that's just my kind of cynical view of things like this.
Yeah,
but
so you're
I
pretty
don't know.
consistent, Gail. It's like in every instance, it's like, let's just keep writing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
and I think the idea too of describing what you just described, Scott, I don't know where its natural home is, but what did you call it a second ago? The
Universal access.
yeah, universal.
Or-
Let's get that definition in there, because even if the report is never read, we might be able to plant. It'll never rise to the level of a meme. We're just too old for that. But if it could get some traction,
Right.
that could be good.
And I wanted to make the point too that I think one of the purposes of doing what we're doing is this is a relatively new enterprise, and decisions about who it's supposed to serve have been made in the past, may or may not have actually been made in the past. And I think just putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is the way it appears, this is the policy that seems to have been in place, or has been in place, and there's a need, basically saying there is a need to make these policies overt. Because, taken from a staff perspective, if you do not have a policy that has been overtly promoted at like a board level or at a citizen level, then the staff themselves ends up appearing to be arbitrary when they make decisions to do or not do something that, theoretically could be done. And that's not fair to them in some ways. It doesn't give them the ability to fall back and say, no, there's a policy that says, we do installations wherever whenever they appear to meet this particular criteria or that particular criteria. So just the act of saying, this looks like how things have been running, and and asking the question of, is that what we really want, or is that just what we fell into for convenience purposes, or to expedite something? That's an important part of what we're doing here by even attempting to write the history.
Sure, the impact on low income. Having some words in this document is going to help solidify that as a consideration in any case, or maybe a policy. Who knows?
And I think that, and I'm more than happy to start working on an executive summary or the outline of that. But my view is that when, Scott said this himself, and I agree with him, when we first started doing this, the sort of prime directive was, don't fail, right? Don't run out of money, don't lose money, don't cost the taxpayers or the ratepayers money. Do what you need to do to become a self-sustaining enterprise. And that's what we did. We made decisions from that scarcity and got to where we got to. Now the question is, 7 years down the road, do we still operate like that, or do we change course in some noticeable way? And I think there is an opportunity to change course, and I think we should suggest what that course change should be.
Yeah. Let's see. We just talked about, selling below cost and how that's risky.
Yeah.
But I don't think that Comcast sells below cost to the affordability, low income population. I think that they get some help.
Well, and
if
it may
that's
be true.
And maybe we could too.
For the same help, yeah. But
Yeah,
somebody
right, right.
somebody has to do that.
And I don't think we've really detailed how that would work. I don't think we have. We could name it as a concept, but I don't know how we would go about getting those funds. Right? We haven't really talked about it in meeting, have we?
No, and I don't think that, to some extent operationally, it's not up to us to do that. But I do think that somewhere on the very long list of activities that should be going on, a look at whether or not it's possible to initiate that program makes sense. I'm trying to remember the name of the program.
The emergency broadband benefit,
Yeah, there's an
and now
emergency
it's the
broadband.
affordable connectivity program.
Okay. And
Yeah,
Carlin
affordable
might have
content.
mentioned. Carlin might have given us some information about that.
Yes,
I think.
there's another older program. I think it was called E-Rate or something like that was available to schools and libraries for internet connectivity. And we registered as an E-Rate provider, so that what we were charging from the light plant over to the school department would qualify, and they could get reimbursement from, I think it was federal funds, for what they were paying for internet when they were using Concord Light Broadband. So it's possible to register for these programs and become a provider and, get that reimbursement and whatever. And it's also possible, as we have many examples around town of cases where we do this, where we simply decide that some program or another, residential heating assistance program or whatever it is going to exist, and there's some way to fund that, and it's there because there are some people that need that help.
Let's not sweat the details too much. I mean, this is the kind of thing that staff,
Right.
they do for a living.
Yeah, and my suggestion is, if it occurs to you and it seems to fit into a section while you're writing, write it in there, as Gail was saying, and then let's
Okay.
get it there.
Yeah.
And then, we'll take all of this as a proposal. And what we'll do in the next two meetings is work through what is in there, and we'll try to make sure that we agree as a task force that, we at least have consensus. And if we have, more than one view of we could go there or there, A or B, then maybe what we'll just do is say, well, who should decide whether it's A or whether it's B, and propose a way that the community can reach that decision.
I wanted to share one other idea with you guys, and it's that when I was in business school, one professor mentioned, and it was just this one nugget that I really enjoyed. It was that if you, the topic was organic growth rate. So what is the organic growth rate of a company? And that would be that is the growth rate that it can sustain without taking on debt.
Mm-hmm.
Funded by operations, by revenue, and that that growth rate, the natural growth rate, is actually a simple function of the profit margin. So high profit margin companies are capable of sustaining higher organic growth rates than low profit. The reason why I bring that here is because we're talking about growth, right? Which is what I'm driving at is that maybe having a higher profit would help grow the business, because then it generates more cash to get put back. It's related to Scott's idea of the cycle,
Flywheel effect, yeah.
which is on my next page.
Yeah.
But I think it connects also, and I'm not sure I want to put this in the report. Nobody wants to hear about my MBA. Right, or a stupid little math equation, but one thing that has been kind of bugging us a little bit is that how come we're paying a dividend already? Now, I don't really know in the pure mathematical business analysis whether or not that organic growth rate is before or after you take the profit out. But I think you can't be driving growth and also extracting a dividend. It's one or the other. You have growth stocks and you have dividend payers. They don't tend to be both. So what we have talked about in other contexts is, maybe we should drive the business a little bit differently to remain in the growth stance for longer.
And just to clarify for me, in what way are we paying a dividend today?
With a payment in lieu of franchise.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you could argue that. It's certainly what it is it's a non-required expense that could otherwise have been redirected into growth or expansion or
Exactly. Yeah. So maybe the business analogy isn't so good, but making claim to some of that leftover cash to be poured back into the business is something that there's a tension, right? And in on behalf of different parties and different interests and stuff, and some people want to basically. Anyway, you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I do. I'm noticing that we're close to time, but and if you recall, just because,
and it's only a couple of pages.
Yeah, it's only a couple of pages, but when we talked a week or so, a couple of weeks ago, I'm just scrolling down in here to find out where it is. I had sort of suggested, under the business return, which is I think what you just touched on, this little section.
Yeah.
If the return is 0 to 5%, or any, the first 5% of returns goes right up into operating reserves until you've got enough reserves that you think nothing's going to happen that's going to sink my ship, right? And then if 5 to 10%, maybe you try and direct that to subscriber growth. And this is just a sort of a decision tree that could be one of the myriad of answers that's available for that. But if you're getting more than 10% return, maybe capital expansion and fiber construction. And
there we go.
And if you're getting better than 15%, then you better think about, wait, maybe I'm charging too much, right? Return it to the subscribers. That's just,
Yeah.
was a little straw man to make us think about the point that you were just on.
Yeah, and maybe this thing should this ever be a cash cow? Yeah. Right? I mean, it's okay if it return. I guess I don't mind if it pays a little bit into the what is it? The cable, not the cable. The Minuteman thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, the subscribers have a claim on that excess too.
Sure they do. And it stands to reason that all other things being equal in terms of delivery method, at a minimum, there should be the potential to return approximately what an investor-owned ISP would be returning to its ownership or shareholders. It just turns out that the ownership and shareholders in this case is the community.
Yeah. Do we think of it being more the town or the subscribers?
Well, I think of it as the town has made the investment, which is one of the reasons why I'm somewhat persuaded to the notion that, the fact that we only serve a subset of the town is kind of a problem, because we're sort of dependent on the full faith and credit of the entire town. And yet we're only actually able to get to a subset of it. Now, if you take the water system only serves a subset of the town, and the sewer system only serves a subset of the town as well. So it's not like there's no precedent for utilities, or enterprises that only serve some of the population. So we could be one of those, but the light plant has an obligation to serve everybody in its territory, and we sort of understand that. And that's one of these policies that we kind of need to help at least contribute to the discussion of clarifying. What does the community really want to do, and how much does it want to spend to do that? What's the perceived value of that decision? And I think the purpose of our report to get at what we're really writing to do, I think, is to give people who take the time to delve into it a way of thinking about this, reasonably clearly, that helps them decide where they stand on that issue. And if we've done that, then we've set the town up to make those decisions in a coherent way. That's
Yeah, or at least
fine.
confront them to
Yeah.
think about. Hopefully, get them to think about it.
Yeah, confront the issues and make them. I happen to think that it would, there's some eminently practical level of fiber construction that can be done, and I personally think it should be done, because I think that it's like having a good road system. If you have a good road system, commerce, education, residents all benefit.
Yep. Yeah, and that term that we just used a second ago, what was it, universal or something? I forget.
Universal access.
Universal access. I think that some of the words that you just gave us might fit nicely in a discussion of universal access. The idea that it redounds to the town as a whole.
Right. Yeah. So, I think that's part of it, is to just get a little bit more verbose about what's on the paper so that it can be read. And I know that there's going to be, some long crunching to try and make this into something that then has a nice Cliff Notes version that people can decide where they stand on. But let's kind of put it all out there and then sort it out as we do. Do you want to cover some of the other concepts that you put in here?
Yeah, there was I was thinking about the current, if you just scroll up just a little bit, no, the other way. Currently we can add new subscribers as quickly as the crews can do it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of limited at the crews.
Mhm.
And that's chipping away at the backlog. Right now we're at 30, maybe they'll get better than that. But I could also imagine transitioning to a new scenario where actually it's not limited by the productivity of the crews. And that's going to be a really big inflection point. In a way, it's out of context for this study, because it's at least a year away. It's got to be a little ways away. And then we'll have to rethink. We'll have to maybe think about having advertising. I think the other thing that'll happen at that instance is we'll finally be forced to confront the fact that we haven't been installing in the hard places, which are the streets without fiber and the MDUs.
Yeah.
And I call them the places that are difficult to serve.
Yeah.
But in defense of the current prioritization, we'll be bigger then.
Mhm.
So we'll have more revenue. So we can actually we'll have more resources to take on the hard cases.
Yeah,
So
there's
Gordon,
no-
are
Go ahead.
you thinking about a future where like contract staff or not staff, contractors, like contract vendors, I don't know if that's the right word, are hired to do the installs? Is that what you're thinking about?
No, what I'm saying is that right now the backlog grows as fast as we can serve it, but at some point we'll catch up.
Okay.
And there'll be a small backlog, and it'll no longer be the critical limiting factor will no longer be the speed of the crews. Right, the crews will slow down because they won't have enough work, new assignments to work on, and so forth. So that's it's a transition in the characteristic of the machine. And actually, David Hessel talked a little bit about this from his perspective as a business owner, that you can't count on a backlog lasting. I think that's the way he put it, but it was something similar to that. And I'll tell you, when I related David Hessel's comment to David Wood, David Wood embraced that. He thought that was a really great point. Anyway, when we do get to that point, we're going to have to start generating business, doing better with the subscribers we do have, and like I say, start tackling the hard cases.
Okay. Good. So So there's capacity for growth and computation of the opportunity.
Yeah, I didn't do any computations. Maybe Scott could help with that,
Yeah,
or you could.
okay.
Okay, though, there's been this, okay, oh yeah, okay. So what do we think we'll end up serving? In this draft, I said about a third.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's there's a reasonable guess there. And, as we talked about when we looked at the numbers last time around, and again, it's detailed lower down in here, some of the math that I did, but you could wonder out loud, whether, today our opportunity is about 76% because 6,131 of the 8,023 present premises are actually served. And today, of those 6,131, well, as of last November, 1,552 have already done that. So that would suggest that that's 25%. So if 1/3 was the number, that we would naturally rise to, you could argue that, that would be about, a little bit less than half again now. That's like another 600 or 700 customers, and then we're done.
Could you scroll to the 8,000? What is it? 6,000 versus 8,000? Okay, wait, let me just. I want to do a simple arithmetic times 0.76. We may already be at it. Here's why. Here's my math, and I actually tried to do it in English in my draft up above. Okay, so you've got that 76%. Okay. And I didn't know what the numbers were. I thought we were at 95%. We're not
So
at 95%.
let me make sure that so this 76% is what we call master address table units served, defined as the number of master address table entries listed as available divided by the total master address table entries, excluding entries for open space and undeveloped parcels. So this is like saying this is the number of places in Concord that actually have fiber today.
Exactly. Okay, so what I'm saying is let's say the magic number is a third.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where you kind of come to sort of even with Comcast. Multiply a third by that 76%, and you get 25%.
Yeah, but so let me just let me hold that. So 6,131 is every place that we could possibly get right now.
Okay.
And of every place that we could possibly get, if we got a third of that, it would be about 2,040, right? That's roughly a third of 6,131.
Okay.
So that would mean that we have about 500 more to go before we're getting to a third of all the places we're allowed to get to. Now, if we ever actually constructed more fiber, 6,131 would get bigger, but 8,023 would not get bigger.
Yeah.
8,023 only gets bigger if somebody builds a new apartment building and adds 100 units, then 8,023 becomes 8,123, right?
Or because we don't serve apartments, the ratio gets even worse.
Or it gets even worse because we've got 2,000 premises that we can't get to at all. And then of the ones that we can get to, we're getting to a quarter of those. So if the natural take rate is a third, we could assume that we get to a third of the ones we can get to, which is another 500. And if we were ever able to get to 100% of all premises, we get to a third of those remainder, which would be another, whatever, 700.
Could I just ask, like, what's the use of having the third as a I don't know, goal, target, important number? Like what is that?
The real point in it is to make sure that you don't invest in something that you can't do. So if we built a system that was capable of supporting, 8,000 customers, but there's only 6,000 customers to be served, then you've wasted money. Same thing as if, you can't assume that 100% of everybody is going to take the service no matter how good you make it. So the service needs to be kind of, you need to think of take rate as market share. What's your market share really going to be compared to the alternatives? There's going to be people who are only going to use a mobile phone. There's going to be people who, simply have to have cable TV and, only will only ever do that. So the understanding what that market share is going to be helps us understand how much money do we expect is ever going to be available for building. Going back to what Gordon was saying about organic growth rate, if you can generate a certain amount of free cash flow based on your current operations, you can keep on reinvesting. But if you've saturated your market, you can reinvest all you want, but you're not going to get any more customers, or because the market's saturated at that point.
I
So
guess.
Go
Sorry.
ahead.
Well, I guess my thoughts around that, like, that's kind of like based on what we know right now, but in the future there might be other uses for fiber that people might find more appealing, like, controlling your energy, which some people have told me is really not. You really need fiber connection to have effective energy management, distributed energy, or
Right.
electricity, whatever. So I just think in the future there, and then, what if the schools have some really awesome thing that the kids can do, like virtual reality from home if they're on the fiber network. So I think there may be things in the future that we don't really anticipate. So I don't know, but I understand
agree.
you have to have some kind of like numbers for budgeting and
Mhm.
targeting,
Yeah.
but I don't want to lock us into, we're only going to get 30%. I mean,
Right.
I guess I don't think that's.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think that's a great point, Gail and Scott. I see the competitive and future possible offerings listed. And I think part of the challenge for this organization is to move into a mindset that would allow them to come up with ideas. They'd almost even need permission or maybe a little push,
Yeah.
because it's risky. And you don't want to stake your reputation on something that has risk. And
Mhm.
anyway.
Yeah. I think that's very, does make a lot of sense. I mean, support for the educational network and the ability to do, sort of more advanced virtual private networking and create, an environment that spurs some sort of innovation or supports the community in other ways is definitely something that could be considered. And of course, if the utility has, free cash flow resources, it becomes possible to do those sorts of things too. And there is a network effect that comes into play when you have fiber everywhere and you can just assume you can get there. I know that one of the things that I prioritized was connecting all the town office buildings, all of them. Even like the one-person office at the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery was connected using essentially a residential broadband connection, but it enabled an employee who literally was kind of off the grid and unavailable to be able to be connected without incurring a hefty bill from a local telephone company. And so there are a lot of benefits to just having a network and what you use it for that we've been able to exploit so far, and, in terms of cost avoidance and so forth.
So some of those benefits could help the town itself, the town government.
Town operations, and they certainly did. And if you went back to some of the annual reports that I wrote up about what we were doing, both in the IT area and in the broadband area, I alluded to some of those efforts, because the fact that all the, water pumping, water and sewer plant pumping stations and sewage treatment and all that stuff is connected to this fiber network really saves us operationally and helps a lot. And, there's even a discussion about trying to figure out whether it ever makes sense. There's an allusion here to going out of service territory. Well, Nagog Pond is a major water treatment facility, and it's going to be expensive to communicate with Nagog Pond. But we also have a right of way with a big fat water pipe that goes all the way from Concord to Nagog Pond. Does it make sense to build fiber out there just to integrate it with our water delivery system? Because, what resource is more important to us than water?
Yeah.
So those are choices that can be made. And that's, that's sort of the real benefit. And I firmly agree that, the internet service is wonderful, but the benefits that the town gets from having access to advanced telecommunications facilities for operations is a very significant value that this provides.
Yeah.
But how to exactly make those choices and, and the visibility to that decision making is a useful thing for us to sort of tease out and make visible. Otherwise, other things will happen. Okay, that's probably a pretty good place to. So let's just briefly discuss how we're going to, sort of organize ourselves on the 24th and the 31st. And I will take the to-do to communicate that both with David and Scott. And what I would suggest is that each one of us, and I'll communicate with each of you directly, really, sort of either claim or, here's the threat promise, either claim a section or be assigned a section. And I'll do one or the other. If you don't claim something, I'll assign you to something, and then just write, and then try and make a commitment to get something out in a week and get some feedback and get it out again. And we'll start with, how's this thing really shaping up next time around on the 24th. We'll spend the bulk of our meeting working on that, and then we'll have another discussion about the 31st, and we'll see whether we have enough time to really put something together that looks that looks readable. And I don't mind, and I'd love if there was another volunteer to be sort of the editor of last resort. I'm not that great an editor, but if nobody else does the job, I will do it.
Well, I'm self-proclaimed good editor, so I can help with editing.
Okay, so maybe Gail, why don't you and I work together, and that way we'll hopefully spur each other on.
Okay, so is
Okay.
our next meeting on the 24th?
Right, and the idea is that will give us a chance to, and I may post for the 17th, but that would mean because I'm expecting that all 5 of us are going to go to the enterprise budget hearing, and just because
Oh,
we're all
okay.
there, that could constitute a meeting, but we won't
Okay,
really meet. I'll just say that we're, that I think that covers us from the, the incidents. If we're all there in person, we don't have, it's a meeting. Because I don't want to have an open meeting law problem. I'll double check what the rules are.
I don't think there's a prohibition on the 5 of us being in the same room.
No.
Particularly not in the context of a meeting that's being run by a different
There
group.
is not.
well, but I thought Mark was saying we might want to make some
Comment.
comments,
Yeah.
during that meeting. I don't know if arguments is the right words, make some
Hmm.
asks or other things. At that
Certainly
meeting,
asking
so.
questions is fair. I haven't seen the materials yet for that, so I don't know what to be asking about. My questions are likely to go in the direction of what's in the capital plan, because I think that's our only chance to get there. I think the other item that we talked about discussing is whether or not we want to make any kind of point about the payment in lieu of franchise. I probably would make a comment on that, just like I did last year when I saw it come up for the first time, because I feel like at the very least, it should be, it should have come from finance, select board, or light board as a, here's a new way that we've found to support this. There's an important mission around Minuteman Media Network. I'm just not so sure why it gets to be the opportunity for the broadband subscribers to do that.
No, I would support that comment.
Yeah. Okay. I'll be happy to make it. I'll send a draft. Okay.
I think there's this idea that if Comcast has to pay, then we should too. I think that was the genesis of that idea.
Right.
But that doesn't say what a reasonable level is. And also the value of Comcast's services are much higher than ours.
Comcast has an exclusive contract to sell apples in Concord, and we're selling pears in Concord. So because we're selling fruit in Concord, we get to pay the same as what they pay to sell apples in Concord. That's the logic.
Yeah. I mean, I think we still pay like what, 5% or of what they do. But I mean, anyway, it's probably a bigger portion of our income than theirs.
Yeah, I don't, my point is that it was kind of cooked up outside of the public process for making such a decision. It's a policy decision, and I don't see where, I don't know which policymaker made that decision.
Yeah, and there's one other thing, which is that they may have been thinking it's a zero-sum game, that whatever we gain, Comcast loses, but actually Comcast and we could lose to yet another.
Yeah, I'd like to see the evidence for that. Are you going to call it Starlink and ask them to pay something?
I saw that Verizon is selling a home 5G service, and I do get 5G. It doesn't have a lot of bars, but I do get 5G at my house.
And it's funded from cable. Now, where the money comes from and where the money goes to are two different things. At any rate, I'll draft a, kind of a question comment in that, and I will probably provide it to the staff ahead of time so that they have an opportunity to answer it in their presentation. I think that's only fair. We've been talking about this for a year, but I don't want to say it. I don't want them to think I snuck up on them or anything.
Okay.
Okay. Are we ready for our public comments? I'm going to take that to be a yes. Raise your hand if you'd like to make a public comment. Okay, Joan.
Thank you. Good evening. It's very nice to see all of the committee members again. Very nice to see you. A great discussion again tonight. Mark, you put up that data. I thought that was very, very compelling to show how the pandemic really hit into the continuation of the build out of the network. And I think it also might be a point of illustration to show the impact that had the network been in place, the value of the network in that kind of situation, where had the town been completely connected, it may have made the difference in terms, again, from a public health standpoint, of the facility of connecting and communicating quickly between, we've got Emerson Hospital here, perhaps with the fiber broadband in place. Had it been in place in that kind of situation, we could have some kind of, if I understand you correctly, a network within the network, such as a health net or something like that, where the Department of Health is connected with the Council on Aging, other providers, perhaps even networked with Emerson Hospital, again, just to facilitate services in this kind of pandemic situation. I think we all dearly hope that we are pulling through it and coming out the other side, but I think the reports are also clear that we'll probably have to be dealing with this situation, at least on some level, in the near future. So again, just the importance of having a reliable, a town-wide reliable network in the public health context, in this public health kind of situation, may have made a difference to a number of people, a direct impact on them. And so again, I would urge the committee to consider that viewpoint as a, again, for the town, for the sake of the town, now and in future situations like that.
Mhm.
And I think your thoughts on the draft, just from what it's worth, just the standpoint, I would lay it out there, get your points in. There's been some very good discussion among the committee members. The information you've put forward is pertinent and very helpful to understand the situation. So I would urge the committee members to build out the report rather than hold back points. Yeah, I'm sure you'll decide that among yourselves, but better, more inclusive, I think, than to leave out information that might make a difference. So thanks so much for the time, and thank you again for your work. I think it's great.
Thanks for your comment, Joan. Pamela?
13 Concord Green, Pamela Dritt. I just wanted to say you guys are so awesome. This is so fantastic. The kind of upper level systemic view of the whole system is really needed and rare to have. And I think you should, I agree with Joan, go for it all, whether it's in the directive or not. People will be grateful for the opportunity to understand and additional information. Don't limit yourselves. Put all the hard issues up there.
Okay.
Thanks for all you're doing.
Thanks, Pamela.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, if, Vince?
A couple of items, comment and a question, actually, on the lost revenue. And I'm just looking at the notes that I wrote down when you were talking about that. You might want to look at the Comcast annual reports for 2020 and 2021. And what they did is the performance is that they've had a record 2021, both in revenue and subscriber increases. 2020 was essentially flat, except for the fourth quarter, and they had a blockbuster fourth quarter. And I, haven't looked if there's any breakdown, if they provide any breakout in more detail. But my guess is for 2020 that, they were not doing new installs either, during the height of the pandemic. And that certainly was true of 2020. The end of 2020 seems a little bit sooner than they typically would have started doing installs again, but it suggests what happened when they were catching up with their own backlog, obviously. And so they had a backlog that would have suddenly increased, the subscribership and a lot of service problems that they wouldn't have been able to deal with, by making house calls, basically. 2021 is an example, I think, of internet consciousness, basically. So that everybody has discovered that the internet is essentially essential, and that the quality has to be improved. And here's where you get into the use cases, you know, and there's dozens of use cases, but, you know, some of the most important ones are remote work, telehealth, as, you know, Joan Zurenberger was mentioning, smart homes, you know, because people have more gadgets installed these days, and some of them are quite important. At least they're important to the people that are using them. One of the things, for instance, that takes up a lot of bandwidth are the security cameras and the home monitoring cameras. And it also requires very low latencies. For instance, if you have a smart doorbell, somebody, you know, hits the doorbell and you happen to be away, which is kind of one of the advantages that, you know, is being touted for that product. You're going to get a little notification at your office, and it's going to sit, you're going to call the application up on your phone and say, hey, I'm not home now, you know, what do you want? You know, leave the box at the door or whatever. Anyway, so what I think the Comcast report shows is that they didn't really lose very much revenue.
Yep.
They increased usage, but it's not a story of their suffering, you know, basically at any time during the past couple of years.
And so are these, you said annual reports, is that Concord related, or is that Comcast
No, that's
That's it.
Comcast overall.
overall?
They will not break out numbers, you know, for Concord. They will, you know, they will tell us how many subscribers they have. We had Greg Franks, who was the Comcast rep, in at the PEG meeting. I think it's 3 meetings ago now. And so they will tell you the exact number of subscribers, which, you know, for Concord is 5,051, I believe, as of 3 months ago. But they will not, you know, go much farther than that. Now, one thing that they can do, and again, this isn't something that they'll disclose, is they know, you know, exactly how much traffic each customer is utilizing, you know, basically how much bandwidth they're using up. And again, during the pandemic, that basically went up by 30%. So, you know, said that people were using Comcast a lot, and, you know, for all of the obvious reasons. It was escape, it was information, it was social engagement, and in some cases, again, as Joan mentioned, it was because people had, you know, various telehealth situations that they were able to monitor, you know, manage over the internet. So, you know, again, Comcast was not suffering. As a matter of fact, if anything, the long-term opportunity for them, and obviously also for Concord Light Broadband, is increased usage, you know, in the post-pandemic era here, and, you know, particularly for symmetrical speed, you know, which Comcast currently doesn't offer. So the other thing I just had a question on was on the light board meeting this morning. And one thing I was curious about on the RFP for the excuse me, for the advanced metering system is seems there's a lot of overlap there in terms of what the vendors there will be proposing versus what would be required, you know, to do the 100% build out, you know, that you're dealing with. You know, they both say that it's going to be 100% coverage. It's going to be some combination of fiber, and certainly in the case of their RFPs, I guess wireless was an option. And, you know, I was just wondering, Mark, in your opinion, and Gordon, is there going to end up being a lot of overlap there, you know, with your work?
I'll cover that briefly. It's a fact that the original purpose, or the first application that was put onto the Concord Light broadband fiber network was in fact a smart metering implementation. So it was built in order to do that, and that was a combination of fiber and wireless to the meter. So that was the original application that ran on this network in the first place, and still actually operates across the network using that AMI system, which is going to be replaced by a more total one. It is more common in the industry, as is my understanding, that most of these advanced metering systems are in fact usually kind of one big or several big radio towers communicating to all the meters is more common, but they can run, as some of them have the ability to also run over fiber connected devices, so they can be hybrid in that way as well. So I think that, as an IT person, I tend to think of something like an advanced metering system as an application that runs across a general purpose network. But I will tell you that as an electric utility and most metering vendors, they never want to share. If you can have a network all to yourself where you have the transmitters and the receivers and end-to-end control of the whole thing, you're going to buy into that because it's more convenient and less variables to work on than something else. So exactly what we end up with, I think, will have a lot to do with how the criteria are applied in those people that are evaluating the RFP responses for AMI. I would just say that the broadband network already covers a huge percentage of every place that it needs to cover to potentially support an AMI application. It comes down to if we're going to buy one that does that or not, and that's a decision that's going to be made by the light plan.
Is there any public version of those proposals that would be available in the near future?
Gordon, do you know that? I don't think so.
No, that's competitive information. So each of the vendors submits that to us, but with an expectation that their competitors aren't going to find out what they wrote.
Yeah.
When does it become public?
I think once
It'll continue to I'm sure there are intellectual property protections that, because we got it, and it doesn't sound great, but we actually have to respect their perspective just in order to get people to respond. So, but yeah, no, I mean the certain, I'm sure the public, there will be publicly distributed information about what the system is going to be and what it's going to be capable of doing, I'm sure.
That's an excellent question for a light board meeting or to be directed to the director of the light plan. Unfortunately, I don't think anybody here can really speak authoritatively on that subject.
Okay, well, yeah, I
This
assume at some point when it goes before a town meeting for approval, that there would be some period before then where the information would be available. Is that?
Yeah, town meeting has actually already voted to authorize it back in 2017. I think it was either $3 or $3.5 million to buy an advanced metering system. So without knowing which one was going to be bought based on it, going through a competitive bid process, which is consistent with public procurement rules. Pamela, did you want to offer something from this morning? What was it?
Yeah, they've already picked the finalists they've looked through all of the data for everyone that submitted a bid that was within the parameters, which is, I believe it was 8 out of 9 or maybe 6 out of 8 or something like that. There were 3 that didn't qualify. But you could probably get some information by talking to Brian Folds, who actually read them all.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Maybe. Okay,
Yeah, I'm just curious.
yeah.
Comment on the low income programs like Internet Essentials and the the new program, the Affordable Connectivity Program. The government is paying the ISPs that participate in that, and it ends up going through to the subscribers, obviously, $30 a month indefinitely. So part of the cost of the program, the government is paying for. So basically, $30 per month per subscriber, ad infinitum, in terms of how long it's going to last. So I guess one of the calculations can be, what is the, kind of the marginal cost of supporting a subscriber. So I guess it's mainly bandwidth and support. And, obviously you have to provide them with, whatever is required in terms of equipment to get started. So there's a capital expenditure.
Mhm.
But after that, what is the cost of the bandwidth and, people on the phone to, answer their needs and questions on how things work and how to get it fixed.
Yeah. Well, that's good experience. I mean, the lowest cost tier that exists today on Concord Light Broadband costs $49.95 a month. So if you just took a $30 subsidy, you'd be down to $19. And then if you could decide that you could forego maybe $10 per subscriber, you could charge people $10 a month for the lowest tier of service and only be, losing $10 compared to a full boat customer, which is, I think eminently doable given how many there are likely to be. But then that I think might make a lot of sense to turn up in our recommendations. Okay, are there further comments from anyone? All right, seeing none, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Thank you, Gordon. I need a second, Gail.
I'll second.
Okay. And thanks. All those in favor, Gordon,
Aye.
Gail,
Aye.
myself, Mark, aye. Thank you so much for being here, all of you. We really appreciate your attention. It
Yeah,
makes
thank
me
you.
do better.
Thank you.
Okay.